Let's see if we are live. I gotta go. Here we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Climate Chat. I'm your host, Dan Miller. And today we have a very special program for you. It's, I guess, not a traditional interview. It's going to be somewhat of a debate. And the question for the debate is which is going to kill you first? AI, artificial intelligence, or climate change? And to debate on the pro AI, whatever exactly that means, side, we have a very special guest, Will Wright. And if many of you who've grown up playing computer games already know Will, or if you're a parent, you know your kids have played his games, including SimCity, TheSims, Spore, SimEarth, and he's currently working on a new game called Proxy, which is AI based. So he's been immersed in AI and has some insights into that. And so we're very excited to have Will with us. So, Will, welcome.
Well, thank you, Dan. Good to be here.
And just before we get started, I want to remind everybody who's watching on YouTube to please subscribe and hit the like button, so this will spread the program to others. And if you're on Clubhouse, you have a link to the Zoom to come join us to ask questions later after Will and I have this back and forth discussion. So Will, the question before us is, people understand that AI can be dangerous, and people understand that climate change can be dangerous. I'm going to be taking the side of climate change being the more dangerous, more likely to kill you first. And by the way, first a little weird because I think you can only die once. But anyway, which will get you. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about why you think that AI can be dangerous and why it, when stacked up against climate change, it actually might be something that will kill us first.
Well, we debated the title of this talk. First of all, we're talking about kill you first, hurt you first, cause the most damage. These are all kind of different things. And I want right off the bat, I want to make it clear, I'm not a climate denier at all. This is really happening in a serious way. It's going to happen. It's going to unfold, screw up our kids' lives, our grandkids, and depending on how old we are, quite a bit of our lives. So I don't deny the climate science in the least. But on the other hand, I've been kind of following AI since I got into computers way back in like the 80s. And, back then people were doing very early experiments in AI, that were pretty lame. Can we do machine translation? Not really. Can we do this? Not really. But every year, every decade, it was like, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And there were people kind of in the field that were all along saying, it's just a matter of the horsepower, the computer horsepower catching up, catching up. And that's actually, I think, one of the main things that differentiates AI versus climate change in my mind is the idea of Moore's law. All right. So AI has been, basically just recently kind of caught Moore's law. It got to the point where the computers are roughly, doubling in horsepower every 2 years. All right. Which means that, we look at the AI we have right now. That means that 8 years from now, it's going to be 16 times more powerful than what we have right now. And right now, it's surprising us. It's exceeding our expectations, outrunning what we thought it could do. And back in the day, people used to think that, okay, it's not really a horsepower issue. We need to understand the human brain, the human mind. And until we understand that, we won't know how to write, correct heuristics and programs to create AI. Turns out that's not so much the case. I mean, we do understand a lot more about the brain than we did back then, but still, most of the brain is kind of a black box in terms of practically how it works. But the horsepower is now building these AI models, like large language models, that we don't fully understand, where they got their answer from. And they're very opaque in terms of going in and reverse engineering their reasoning. So apparently we are able to create, fairly intelligent systems without directly understanding everything about the human brain. And it's a matter of the computer horsepower basically taking over from that point. And that's going to just be more and more the case going forward. Now, if we think in terms of how AI, might hurt you or kill you, There are a lot of dangers, that we're starting to see right now. But again, imagine 10 years from now when these things are, orders of magnitude more powerful. Uh, we have risks that we probably don't even realize right now. We can't even see coming. Climate change, feels like this, inexorable, slow Greek tragedy unfolding before us. We know it's coming. We can hear the drum beats. Uh, and we're not quite sure about like when the AMOC, might flip, or the methane might start being released in Siberia, whatever it is. There are all these unknowns in climate science, and they lead to a very wide variety of predictions. Are
Mhm.
we, going to be dealing with a foot level in sea rise by 2050? 3 feet or 2 inches. The models are all over the map in terms of the timing. This stuff is going to happen. We are losing Antarctic, ice. We are, having things, ocean currents being disrupted, etc. Uh, so this stuff is happening. We're just very unsure about the timescales.
Okay.
Whereas I don't think the timescales of that are of the slope that Moore's law is. All right. So Moore's law, if we just look, 10, 15 years in the future, we're dealing with systems that are, we can't imagine what their capabilities might be. Right now people are using AI for doing really elaborate scams, scamming people out of their life savings. A lot of people here are going to lose their jobs, or at least have to transfer to or learn how to use AI in their current job. They obviously will have the ability to influence elections, but really, bad leaders. I'm not going to go either way here, but I'm just saying they're going to have the ability to change our governments in ways that
Hmm.
we, as an educated population, would not choose to do. Plus,
Okay.
I think right now we're seeing a lot of use of these things, in terms of media, influencing media bias, which is probably increasing the polarization, which can lead to things like wars and all this other stuff. So, if nothing else, the global conflict that's being generated, perhaps assisted by AI, might be leading to a lot of deaths already, right now, this day. Um,
Okay. Well, why don't we go back and forth? And
yeah.
I'll try to discuss some of the things you mentioned and put it in the context of climate. So
Mhm.
first of all, when some basics about climate, and even some things that maybe not everyone knows, is that I think the human perception in general about problems, especially pollution problems, are that yeah, they get bad, and then when you finally stop doing the bad thing, it gets better. Like if you pollute a river and then there's a chemical plant upstream, you can't swim or fish anymore. You get your friends together, you shut down that plant, a little while later, you go fishing and swimming again. That's not climate change. CO2 lasts in the atmosphere for hundreds to thousands of years. We've already increased CO2 by 50%. And when you add the other non CO2 greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide, the forcing to warm the earth is about 2 times the pre-industrial CO2 level. So we've got this thing going, and even though it's not horrible yet, I mean, by the way, it's killed a lot of people already. So depending where you are, it might have gotten you already, but it hasn't gotten everybody, and everyone doesn't feel threatened by it yet. But it's building up, and it doesn't. You don't ratchet it down unless, as we discuss on this program, there are certain things we can do, like artificially cool the earth, but we're actually not moving forward on any of these things. We're not even lowering our emissions, which is the obvious thing to do if you have this problem. So we've set this ball, sort of rolling down this hill, and getting to some of the points that you were making. When I think about the dangers of climate change, yes, I do think about, you know, extreme weather. I think about heat waves, for example, that in 2003 killed 70,000 people in Europe. That was due to climate change. Extremely hot summers, defined as like a summer that 50 years ago happened 1 in 1,000 times. It was that hot. Those now happen every 5 years. So yes, there's going to be these kind of what I call traditional impacts of climate change. But actually, what I'm concerned about more is what you were talking about. It's the breakdown of society that the stresses of climate change will cause and already are causing. For example, there's a lot of right-wing governments in Europe, for example, and that was caused somewhat by immigration from like the Syrians moving in. Not a lot of them actually, but enough to get everyone worried. Well, why did they move out of Syria? Well, they moved out of Syria because there was a 5-year drought that was causing havoc. And they even asked for help from the United States, which we didn't give. And then that caused internal conflicts in Syria, and many of them moved out to Africa, but some went to Europe. And that one little climate impact uh, caused that kind of social unrest. The Arab Spring was triggered by a drought in Russia, which was clearly climate change caused. And because Russia stopped exporting grains because they wanted to make sure they had enough for their own people, and therefore global food prices spiked. And there's, by the way, a really interesting MIT study that shows every time food prices shoot up, there are riots around the world. And it kind of just shows the link between civil unrest and disruption and stresses on the food supply. Well, climate change is already causing stresses on the food supply, but nothing like we're going to see in probably just a little while. So I know one thing you argue for, and maybe we'll get into a little more, is how fast AI can happen.
Right. And I think a lot of the examples you're giving, climate change has happened throughout all of history. All right. It's just been much more subtle than it is over the last 100 years, especially the last 20. All right. So it's the rate of change, the amount of climate change that's happening over a short period of time that's really kind of alarming, relative to what we see in the fossil record or even historical record. There's another kind of interesting property of these two things. Climate change, like you said, it's this ball that's rolling downhill, and we're making kind of pathetic attempts to slow it down. Maybe some might be
we're
really
talking about that. We're not actually doing that, but yeah.
yeah. But AI, on the other hand, is a ball that's rolling downhill, and we're actively pushing it faster and faster. We want that, whether or not we try to legislate any limitations on AI research, the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to put it back. If we don't do it, somebody else, China will do it, whoever, as long as there's profit motive to be made there.
Well, by the way, I agree. I agree with what you're saying there, but I think, and maybe we should dig into this aspect of it. Climate change. It's clear that the impacts of that climate change, which is now far more, I mean, the climate has always changed and water is wet, but this climate change is at a rate unprecedented in Earth's history, by the way. And yes, it's been warmer in the past when cold-blooded dinosaurs roamed the Earth, but not large, warm-blooded mammals. And so we're really putting ourselves in a position where our civilization, which developed with certain regions growing food and certain everything being balanced, we're really going to put a stress on it. And those stresses will, I mean, almost by definition, disrupt our way of living, right? Food, sea level rise, extreme heat. But AI, which I agree with you, we're pushing faster and faster, and exponential growth doesn't necessarily, I mean, if it goes wrong, could end up killing us or something. I mean, certainly going to change the whole job situation. Totally agree with you on that, and probably much sooner than people think. But talk a little bit about how you see AI going off the rails in a direction that would lead to someone listening to this with their life being threatened, or just it being dangerous to society in general.
Well, I think the most dangerous thing about AI is we don't fully understand the dangers of it. Climate change, we kind of know people will be displaced, they'll be starving, we kind of understand, we don't understand necessarily when or to what degree, but we pretty much have a clear map of what the possible dangers are from climate, change. AI, I think we have no idea. A lot of people think Skynet, the malevolent AI is going to take over, make us their slaves, whatever. I think most people that are seriously into AI think that that's not really, I mean, if that could happen, it's still a ways off. What's more likely is that these AIs, and first of all, that kind of assumes that there's going to be one monolithic AI that, basically decides to control the world. But one of these things that's kind of underappreciated is that there'll be thousands, millions of different AIs with different agendas, different programming, different abilities. So it'll be a whole ecosystem of these, almost like a biological ecosystem. Now, of course, within an ecosystem, typically some are more expansionistic, more predatory, and they might there might be, kind of a matrix-like war between the AIs. But I'm really right now in the near term, I think it's AI is being used by bad actors that are going to be the biggest threat to us.
AI controlled by bad actors. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And you talk about how, and I agree, climate change is just over the last few decades, it gotten exceedingly, unpredictable. It's also put a lot of visibility into how limited our climate models are. Um, and I think that there actually is some interesting synergy between these two, because I think one of the best hopes we have for really understanding the climate will be enlisting AI to help us build far more accurate predictive climate models. Because climate is of a complexity that I don't, the best humans can, solve this part, solve that part. There's a whole teams working on ocean currents, other ones working on aerosols, other ones looking at ice core samples, historical record. But to somehow bring all this together and build a predictive model going forward, I think it's going to require super intelligence, kind of beyond our abilities. There's so much chaos built into the system. And this is actually one of the first places where they started to understand what chaotic systems were. That are very tiny little,
Weather. Yeah, that's right.
tiny little thing being off here, the butterfly effect, they kind of refer to it as. But back in the 50s, a guy named Jay Forrester invented this thing called system dynamics. And it was a way of predicting kind of roughly based upon a chemical processing. He had flows, stocks, valves. But he actually built, actually one of the very first city simulations, called urban dynamics. And there was no map or anything. It was all just numbers, like a big spreadsheet. But later, a group in the 70s started building a much more elaborate model called the Club of, well, it was called the Club of Rome, but the model they built was the world dynamic model. And they were trying to predict, food supplies,
The
population
limits of growth.
across the entire world, and then run this model going forward, forward, forward. And when they ran that model, like around 1970, it predicted, world civilization was going to collapse in the late 80s, due to starvation, and then our peak population would hit something like 50 billion. Uh, none of these things came true. And
Of course, they recalculated it recently. We did a show on this a while ago now, but and the recalculation show, I think it was, I'm trying to remember now. I think it was like 2040 now.
yeah.
There was more resources than expected, but the pollution part, which is the CO2, is growing sort of along the
I mean,
lines
they
that they
didn't even
expected.
account for climate change in that model. They
Say
were more
again?
about food production and population growth
No,
and
but pollution was,
oh yeah,
yeah,
pollution.
is CO2 in this case. I mean, they plugged that in as the marker.
Yeah.
Um,
But now they're basically kind of predicting maybe 10 to 12 billion people maxing out around 2050, 2060-ish. They just, there are a couple of factors they had off of that model. They didn't foresee the green revolution and that food production would become more efficient per acre, et cetera. And those tiny little variables being off led to, hugely, and this is kind of like the butterfly effect or chaos theory. And right now, a lot of our climate models are just, that's why you get such a wide range of output from the climate models we have right now. Now, they do basically say that, having more CO2 will obviously warm the planet.
mhm.
Certain aerosols can reflect solar radiation away. They do understand the fundamentals. It's just, how these things interact with each other. What exactly is going to cause the AMOC to shut down? How much effect clouds have? What level of clouds will reflect versus hold in heat? That kind of thing.
But along the lines of what you said, as I like to say, uncertainty is not your friend. The
Yeah,
fact
yeah.
that we don't know exactly what's going to happen, as you were saying with AI. I mean, that's the danger of climate change as well. Like, although we do know a lot about the kinds of things that will happen. And again, we just had Elliot Jacobson here last week, who's a doomer, which he's pro nature. I didn't realize he was pro doom. He's like he thinks that people shouldn't be here in order that the rest of nature can survive. But assuming that we want to preserve humanity along with the rest of nature, there's a lot of choices we can make. And on this program, we're actually quite optimistic about the things we could do, but we're not necessarily optimistic about the things we will do.
Yeah.
And that gets us back to the fact that we're building up these sort of one-way, it's like a ratchet, in terms of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. And if we look back, I think 2008 and the subprime mortgage crisis, which almost collapsed the economy, that was a little tiny thing in a house of cards, which we call civilization, that no one even ever heard about before. Subprime
Yeah.
mortgage, what even was that thing? And yet now take climate change. Well, you'll be pulling major cards out of the deck at the same time, including, food security and, infrastructure destruction through the flooding and sea level rise, and then the heat and migration, of course, which is a really big card where people have to move like they did in Syria in a small way. Now imagine that happening on a grand way because certain parts get uninhabitable. And so now you have all of the things. So now instead of one little card being pulled out of the deck, you have 3 or 4 or 5. And society is robust in some ways, but not so robust in others. And
Yeah.
in some sense, what I'm saying is a little bit like what you're saying. You're saying there's uncertainty in AI and it could screw around with our way of life.
Yeah.
But I just think right now we're on the path for climate is sort of much more certain if we do a probability analysis, an expected value analysis.
Well, yeah,
You
you look at the
could,
profit motive, a lot of people have very strong profit incentives to develop AI, expand it to all these different areas. Most people right now, they look at mitigating climate change as a profit demotivator. Oh, we're making all this profit on our oil. If you want to put in these regulations, we're going to get less profit. But if we lived 500 years, if that was our lifespan, our calculation of profit motive would change. We would understand that, oh, okay, I'm going to be around 200 years from now. Therefore, I'm shooting myself in the foot, by putting this crap in the atmosphere. Really, my profit motive at that point is to mitigate the climate change. If I were to live that long, I think that's half the problem right there.
well, by the way, unfortunately, humans are very short-term focused. I mean, that would already been true. That was true in 1988 when Jim Hansen testified to Congress and said we must reduce our emissions, and he was right, but we totally ignored it. I mean, so humans are sort of animals that grew up a couple 100,000 years ago on the savannah, and there were two things that you had to worry about. One was, what am I going to eat today? And the second was, what's going to try to eat me today? And
Yeah,
besides that, 2 weeks from now is like forever, And so now we're dealing with a problem. Totally agree with what you said. I mean, from an economic point of view, it's clearly true today that we
yeah,
should be reducing our emissions. But since we won't benefit from it today, we're going to benefit from it, 10, 20, 30 years from now. Uh, we don't care that the quote, profit motive is there. You have to have way
right.
too long-term thinking for that.
And that's even, parents thinking about their kids, affording their education or leaving them something when they pass away. That's at least a little bit longer than a politician who's worried about, am I going to get reelected in 4 years, right?
Right. Or
So
two.
yeah, whatever, exceedingly short time scale, to be doing your planning based around.
So I think, but that incentive structure is set up to make climate change more dangerous than it would otherwise be. I agree with you. If you really think about it, if we address climate change, we'll save a lot of money, by the way, because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. We'll have cleaner air. It'll be a nicer world. But in the short run, we like what we're doing. We want to keep status quo, even though the status quo is not one of the future options we have available to us. But let's get into sort of, I've talked a little bit about what will kill you. I mean, let's in very basic terms here. Now, there's a
Yeah,
lot more subtlety you can get into, but in terms of climate change, one of the big ones is it's going to disrupt the food supply, and there won't be enough food for everyone at certain times. It used to be if there was like a Ukraine war or something like that, that that bread basket would be disrupted. That was maybe not that uncommon, but there would be other bread baskets around the world that would make up the slack. And now those are getting impacted by climate change. And
yeah,
again, people say, well, they try to dismiss it because it hasn't killed us all yet. well, wait a second, it's getting worse and worse and worse, and the extremes are happening much more often now. And so disruption of food supply, we should keep it simple. Disruption of food supply. Um, uh, Again, disruption of governments. And if you don't have a stable government, you have limited resources that leads to war, right? Almost always, really. And so that kind of thing is going to build up tensions. So you could die from starvation, you could die from war, you could die from extreme weather, depending on where you live. Tropical areas where the wet bulb temperature very soon is going to exceed the human survivability index. And if in the book, The Ministry of the Future, I don't think I'm giving too much away. In the first chapter, what triggers this whole crisis and the ministry people starting to want to fight climate change was the fact that 30 million people died in a heat wave in India, where the wet bulb temperature was above survivability for quite a long time. And so people just died all over the place. And that only took place a little while in the future. That was not like the next century or anything like that. So those are just a few ideas of how you might be impacted by climate change. I'd like to hear from you a little bit about how you think. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with what you said about the growth of AI and the profit motives, but if we use it well, it will help us. Maybe it'll help us solve climate change.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
if
I
it's
think
not
that,
used well, it could end up harming us. I'd like to hear from you about how you think that might happen.
well, of course, it's going to be used in every possible way. We're going to have bad actors using it to scam people, influence elections, maybe even, start conflicts around the world. But at the same time, I think it has a lot of opportunity for having benefits. Probably unlike most climate change, depending where you live, you might get a little benefit, temporarily. But for the most part, it's going to be bad news, for almost everybody, long run. But AI, it can have huge impacts on healthcare, understanding, how to fight disease, how to create vaccines, how to, target cancer cells. These are very, deep, almost intractable problems that they're having pretty amazing success already using AI, just to do things like predict protein folding and stuff like that. And education as well. I think that education is one area where AI could be huge. I work in entertainment, and I'm looking at ways in which, AI can be used in entertainment, but kind of more Trojan horse educationally. So as the system understands you more and more deeply, rather than just target advertising to you, how can we kind of unveil the hidden part of yourself that you might want to see? You get insights. It might change your behavior in a good way. It might make you become a climate change activist. Who knows?
Mhm.
But again, it's climate change is based on physics that are very known. We just don't understand the complexity of these systems interacting. But I'm sure it's not going to be unfolding at the rate of Moore's law. And to me, that is kind of like the scariest thing. When I got my first Apple II computer back in like 1980, yeah, I taught myself to program. A few years later, they came out with like the most amazing supercomputer ever called the Cray supercomputer, and they were using it for climate modeling, and planetary science, and also simulating nuclear weapons. It was this giant, like room-sized thing, very cool looking. Uh, I read recently that this little watch on my hand has 3 times the power of a Cray. So it's just amazing, within, my lifespan that we've gone from this to that. And the Moore's law is slowing down a little bit, but not much. It's been amazingly consistent. I think when Moore first proposed it, he said it was doubling every year. They moved it to 18 months. Now it's every 2 years. But, over 10, 15 years, it's hardly makes a difference whether it's 1 or 2 years.
Right.
And, again, what scares me is that we're just going to turn around one day and then there's going to be some huge AI issue. It might be unintentional, it might be intentional, but we will not see it coming. Climate change we see coming, unfortunately, and we can imagine things that we might do that we're not doing about it. AI, has the ability to totally blindside us one day, just out of the blue.
Well, I would argue that climate change can totally blindside us as well. I mean, we're expecting some future thing in 2050. Everyone's worried about 2050. 2030 could be, as you know, we also talked about tipping points, right? Where
Yeah.
you could cross them and you decide, oh, I don't like that anymore. Well, tough luck. I mean, you're going to get them anyway.
Well, I think
We seem to have triggered some of those already, including the West Antarctic ice sheet, which will add like 10 feet plus of sea level rise over some longer time frame. But that's on top of all the other sea level rise that will be happening this century. Jim Hansen says, depending on how things unfold, we could have 10 feet plus of sea level rise this century. And so many people live within, in coastal cities and things like that. The incredible disruption that would cause lots of social instability, of course, and make it very difficult for governments to, keep things under control. And so
yeah.
you have failed states, which makes it very difficult for those millions and billions of people living in cities to sort of, get food and sanitation and have a job and all these things. When the city starts to crumble because it's getting inundated all the time,
Mhm.
those things get very, very difficult. We
Yeah,
have
it
so
will.
much optimism bias that the
Yeah.
future will be like the present.
But
And
in climate change, we kind of we're cataloging these tipping points. We're not exactly sure when they're
the
going to
ones
happen.
we can think about, yeah.
Yeah. AI, we have no idea what the tipping points are. Um, Now, let's just for uh, fun, let's pull back the argument a little bit higher level and say which is more likely to lead to the collapse of human civilization. All right. Um, Now, humans are pretty adaptable, right? We could have 10-foot sea level rise. It's going to be incredibly costly, disruptive. But I think human civilization, depending over what time scale, if it happened in 5 minutes, yeah, we're screwed. But if it happens over 50 years, we'll pull back and change things and design things in different places. I think that human civilization in general will be hopefully adaptable enough to survive the worst aspects of climate change until we manage to, right the ship, which might be 100 years from now or more. Um, AI, I think has the potential to wipe us out before you even know it's coming, uh, in a variety of ways. But
Can you
Sky,
give us some example or an example of, I guess, just a scenario that you're coming up with, but um, how do you see that? Like, what could an AI do in this bad case, whatever, uh, that would wipe us out? Because if it's just thinking along, then it's nothing going to do anything. It has to impact our ability to eat, our ability, to live somehow. So what would it do?
yeah, well, I mean, if I'm going to go out and plant seeds in my backyard and grow corn, it probably doesn't, except for me having to get the seeds and water and stuff, it's probably not going to impact that at all. In terms of me being able to communicate, transmit power across power lines, have global shipping,
Hmm.
air transportation, yeah, depending on whether it's done by a bad actor or done by a malevolent AI, it can shut down our power grid. It can bring us back, to the pre-industrial age pretty easily because we're so dependent on it now.
By the way, a Carrington event, a um, a
Solar storm, yeah.
solar flare that hits the Earth in just the right way, like it did in the 1800s, that would do all the things you just said, and that's kind of expected any time. But again,
Yeah,
that
but
gets back to humans not thinking very far ahead, right? They're
yeah.
not. They don't take into account. Um,
Well,
as long as it's like, well, it's not going to happen soon. I'm not going to worry about it.
right. And we talk about climate change and AI here, but those are not the only possible threats we face. Global nuclear war, nanotech getting out of control, or biotech, pandemics, which may or may not be engineered. These are all, risks to civilization, right? And they
Although I
all,
would argue that those risks are greatly enhanced by climate change. So again, nuclear war, let's say you have India and Pakistan and the rivers are flowing from one country to another and because of drought, because of climate change, it's dropping and this country wants their farmers to get the water. So they take the water and the other country doesn't like that. They're both nuclear powers. That kind of thing could happen.
oh yeah,
Actually, all of the things you just mentioned, I think would be exacerbated by the stress of of climate change. Again, I'm not like particularly worried about the heat wave killing a particular person, but those stresses leading to the collapse of a civilized society would cause havoc and death, for many, many people.
Right.
So,
Perhaps the
and
only
it,
risk that I didn't mention that would not be exacerbated by climate change would be like an asteroid hitting us. Uh,
an
you know,
asteroid hitting us, well, would probably kill us all if it's big enough, but
yeah,
the probabilities of that are fairly low in the next. By the way, I think you and I are on this discussion are talking about this century, right? We're in general. I mean, the problems we're saying are going to happen, whether it's AI or climate change,
right.
are
Well, the
going to be
Tyler talk,
happening this century.
if the Tyler talk is which is more likely to kill you, that means in your lifespan, right?
Well,
During your,
and then it has to be within your lifespan, right? So that
yeah,
would mean within the next, well, it's all different lifespans here, but
yeah. But for the most part,
20, 30, I kind of think in the 20, 30-year time frame. And
yeah,
by the way, I don't think you're saying that AI will definitely kill you, and I'm not saying that
no,
climate change will definitely kill you, but we're saying which one has a chance of killing you first, which one's
right.
more dangerous, maybe a better way to put it.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of getting back to that. AI on the, does have the opportunity to help mitigate the climate risk.
Mhm.
I think a very strong possibility. I don't think climate change has much of a opportunity to mitigate the AI risk. Uh,
Well,
no,
I
except
always
for
think I was thinking like, will AI take over? Well, no, we're climate change will wipe that out first. But you're saying no, it's going to happen pretty fast. So climate
well, I
change
mean,
won't have a chance to wipe us out before AI takes over.
there's one tiny peripheral topic here, which is the energy, required. Right now, it's kind of a horse race between cryptocurrency and AI is coming up fast. You know, the amount of
In
actual
terms of energy
computational,
demand, what?
hmm?
In terms
Yeah,
of
the computational heat, generated from all these AI systems.
Mhm.
It's coming up fast on cryptocurrency, except it's actually doing something. It's actually solving problems,
Something
generating
useful.
results, as opposed to playing around with stupid random numbers.
Yeah, well, doing useful things like helping you play your new proxy game, right? But
Right? Or recommending what to buy on Amazon or influencing the next election. The almost like drones, in warfare right now, are about to, they're going through a transformation of being AI enabled,
wait,
where
say it again. What are you talking about?
drones, uh,
Drones. Okay,
yeah,
drones.
in military forces, for up to now, you had to have some guy way back here with a radio connection telling the drone what to do, looking at a video feed and all that. you know, right now, they're building autonomous drones that make their own decisions, look at their own video feeds, need no radio communication, they can't be jammed. Um, that alone, and then we talk about, global conflicts and how that's going to disrupt people. And this is allowing a much smaller, poorer country to field a very effective fighting force, or rebels to overthrow a government. I mean, so AI
And we're
is,
seeing some of that. Of course, the U.S. forces
oh yeah.
recently been attacked with drones. I guess
Mhm.
those were radio controlled drones,
Well, yeah,
but
actually, a lot of them aren't.
uh,
Well, some of them are actually just guided by GPS, but even those can be jammed. And but these are all technologies that are happening right now, probably at some level, but will be all over the place in 5 to 10 years. Where some
mhm.
countries can put together a drone force and engage a huge surprise attack like Hamas did.
Yeah. Of course, maybe we can also use drones in fighting climate change, things like precision agriculture, where drones can fertilize individual plants and just like bees, I guess, in a way,
Oh yeah, there was
and
one.
then maybe seed clouds or things like that.
There was one plan to build, a huge fleet of these underwater drones that would just measure the ocean currents and temperature and salinity
Hmm.
and, autonomously roam, reporting back data. If we had just that data from a huge fleet of ocean drones, our climate models would probably improve dramatically.
Well, they already have the code Argo floats, what you're talking about, and yeah, scientists wish there were more of them, but they're the ones who also taught us about the AMOC
Right.
and ocean heat, which, by the way, speaking, getting back to climate change, people think there's this linear thing, but already in 2023, the sea surface temperatures were off the charts. just way more than people thought. We were at 1.5 degrees last year when
Uh-huh.
people are hoping to keep us below 1.5 by 2050. Well, sorry. And with predictions of 2 degrees by in the 2030s, where it used to be, after 2050, people were thought we might hit 2 degrees. But now Jim Hanson's latest is saying that no, warming has accelerated significantly, and we could hit 2 degrees in the 2030s. 2 degrees is, I think it's catastrophic on its own. I mean, while the averages don't go up that much, the extremes go up tremendous amount. That's why I mentioned, extremely hot summers up 20,000% in the
Yeah.
last 50 years. I mean, you can see on the news almost every day some picture of some flood coming down the middle of a town with cars floating,
Yeah.
down with it. I mean, that's happened. That didn't happen. You have 9 inches of rain in LA last week, when 2 inches is a lot. 3 inches is crazy.
Uh-huh.
9 inches, there's no infrastructure that can handle that. There was 30 inches of rain in Italy in a day or 24 hours or something
Oh,
a
wow.
few years ago.
Uh-huh.
This is insane. And our society is not built for this.
Mhm.
We assumed a steady state of climate, with little fluctuations,
Mhm.
not this crazy thing. And so it's going to put stresses, and we're not going to, unfortunately, as rational beings, we're not that rational, right? And so therefore our response to this isn't going to be pretty either. We're going to be blaming everybody. The rise, I mean, we're seeing the rise of right wing, kind of governments and fascism and things like that. And we just think, oh, maybe it's just a phase we're going through. Well, maybe it's the stresses that we're going under. And then I do agree that AI might help, push some of these bad things. And then you get to the point, well, was it the stresses of climate change that got people to use AI in these negative ways, like to fight that war or
Right.
to do that other thing? So then I would still assign your death to climate change if climate change was what pushed AI in that direction, or the use
Well,
of AI in that
yeah,
direction.
but again, AI, it's going to be on both sides of the fence. You'll have people looking at, profit opportunities that occur because of this disruption, using AI as a tool to either enhance that disruption, profit off of it, whatever, while other AIs are trying to solve this. These AIs are going to be battling in the hands of different actors toward cross purposes quite a bit.
But people could build AIs to fight against the bad AIs, right? That's going to happen.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We'll have AIs on both sides of whatever battle it is,
Mhm.
fighting each other, for control.
You don't really see the same in climate, except we could artificially cool the Earth using sunlight reflection methods or something like that, which I predict we're going to do, even though so many people are against it.
Mm.
The question is also, when will people wake up to the idea that we actually have to do something about climate? I guess so. There's a similar question about AI. There's been a lot of discussion, though, about that, about AI is dangerous. Let's stop it. There was this letter written, I guess, that says, we should really stop AI, which, of course, I don't know if you can do. Can you talk a little bit about that, about whether you think humans, if they decide to, can take control of the dangers of AI?
Well, every time you ask AIs that, they say, "Of course you can. You can always turn us off." That's what the AIs tell you when you ask them that exact question. Uh, but no, the genie's out of the bottle. You could put in legislation that people have to have these safeguards, these guardrails. Other people will figure out how to build it or remove the guardrails because they want to use it for things that it was not intended to be used for. Uh, so no, I think it's something that we've already kind of lost control of. At least as a world society, we are not going to be able to legislate and control this technology. There have been similar things happening, in some of the biosciences, where they say, it's unethical to be experimenting on humans or whatever. And they put limitations in place. But I don't think there's been such a strong profit motive for people to kind of jump over those boundaries as there is with AI. With AI, there's such more of a profit incentive for another city state or bad actor to ignore whatever we decide is ethical, for constraints that we build into our AIs. So, and
Although with climate, we have an incredible profit motive. We have fossil fuel industry, which is fueling
right,
disinformation, buying off politicians. We clearly know what to do. We've known for many decades
right,
what to
and
do.
it's a similar
And
thing,
it's clearly the profit motive that is stopping us from taking action on climate. I mean,
right.
and so I would say that's as strong, or if not stronger. It's organized, it's extremely well funded, and this is today.
Well,
This is
that's
not
what I'm
like
saying.
sometime in the future. This is today. That profit motive is there for, unfortunately, destroying the earth. And we know it. People talk about it like a
Right.
normal kind of way. Then yet we don't seem to be able to do anything about it, so far, at least.
Well, that was the thing about if we live 500 years, that would not be the profit motive. Our profit motive would be to deal with it now so we don't pay later,
Well,
a lot
different
more.
people have different profit motives. If I'm
Yeah,
a
different
fossil
kinds
fuel
of.
industry and the profit motive for the world, I would totally agree, is to get rid of that industry, right? And to replace it with a clean energy industry. No question about it. But me, if I'm the owner of the fossil fuel industry, that's not my profit motive. And it turns out right now, because of history, I have political power. I have tremendous wealth and resources. I can influence. So there's a difference, right, between what is best for society
Yeah.
versus what is, and by the way, you're saying the same thing about AI, right? The person who scams, it's not best for society to do scams, but that particular scammer makes money on it. So we have to distinguish between, unfortunately, by the way, between what's best for society and what's best for individuals that can influence the direction of climate change or AI.
Well, not just society, but whose society? If I lived in the Marshall Islands, I would be pretty upset that America's, about to flood my whole country, because of the carbon emissions that we put out relative to the Marshall Islands, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
every society is going to have a different point of view on, profit, risk, and credit assignment. Whose fault is this? Who should be really paying, to fix this?
But I wish we were even that aware, because take almost every coastal city in the world, right, is
Yeah.
going to be impacted. And so even now we can stop and think and, oh, wow, that's pretty bad. And even if we're not sure whether to be 10 feet, it would only be 3 feet, but 3 feet is obviously incredibly destructive, many parts of the world. But even there, humans just don't have the ability to think that far ahead. Or it's, again, optimism bias. Maybe it won't be that bad. I'm just going to pretend it's not going to be that bad. There's many psychological barriers we have to action on climate change. In fact,
No, I
again,
agree.
we know all the climate science. You said, well, I mean, we know everything we need to know about climate science. We're going to learn a lot more, but we know what we need to know. We also know all about the solutions, and we know what we need to do. Pretty clear. I mean, we'll figure out new cool things in the future, but right now we have enough to get started. And on net, we're doing absolutely nothing right now. So it's one of those problems, maybe like AI, that even when you know well, I guess with AI, you're arguing we don't know the dangers, but
Yeah, no, I think you do
we
have
know the dangers and we still won't do anything. So
right. I
that's
think
bad
climate
for
change, you
climate
do have a map.
and AI, by the way. That's bad for both of them.
Yeah, for climate change, you have a map, and there's a big jungle here, and there are tigers in the jungle. You maybe not know exactly where the tigers are or when they're going to jump on you, but they're in there. AI, we just have a blank piece of paper. Where could this lead? We don't know.
Well, when you have a blank piece of paper, it's much easier to have optimism bias for that. Well, maybe just it'll be a wonderful world and AI will be wonderful. And
Walk in the park, yeah. The also like you're saying about the optimism thing. When I'm reading something and it says, "Oh, this bad thing might happen as soon as 2030 or at least by 2050," I'm going to just remember 2050, right? And in my mind, I'm going to think, "Oh, I'm probably not going to live that long. Okay, I don't have to worry about it. I erase it from my mind." I think people
yeah,
have empathy to do that.
I am a little surprised at that, because people know that. I mean, if they think that way, but they still have children, or they know
Oh
people that
yeah,
have children or something. And if you ask anyone point blank, would you do anything for your child? Oh, yes, I would do anything for my child. And almost everybody would say that. But now we have a chance to act on
Yeah,
that and to take steps right now that might have, some impact on economic activity in the short run. I think, by the way, greatly improve economic activity in the long run. But in the short run, and if it disturbs, the way of life a little tiny bit, then forget it. I don't want to do it. Even if they think about their kids. So there's strange psychological barriers to
yeah,
action.
that's an interesting point because most of us that have kids right now, they will most likely, in most cases, live to see the end of the century. Our kids,
Correct.
you know, um, they're the ones that are really going to be paying the price.
Hmm.
What we're not doing today. And I
That's
know there are a lot of younger kids and groups forming around climate activism. But it feels like there might be a way to enhance that. You know, the kids begging their parents to stop, doing this, that, or the other.
But I wonder if AI will then, take over and solve climate for us. So, show us how renewable energy is better and cheaper, figure out the best way to cool the earth temporarily while we, take CO2 out of the air and all those kinds of things. We could use AI
Yeah.
for all of that as well.
Well, I mean, so many people have their ideas on how to fight. Are you familiar with that city design in northern Saudi Arabia, Neom,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The one
the
in Saudi
linear
Arabia.
city thing?
The very long. I forget how long it is, but some
It's
crazy.
like 130 miles long and
Yeah,
it's
one building or
miles
something.
wide.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're kind of it looks like this crazy pie in the eye experiment, like most utopian city efforts are,
Hmm.
and it's going to be total surveillance society. You know, and, uh, don't want to rag on Saudi Arabia, but um, and then they're doing this with the idea that they attract all this kind of zero emission technology, makes things self-sustaining, that it will become kind of a think tank, I guess, for sustainable societies going forward. But yet
Oh,
they are,
although just the climate impact of building that thing, which
yeah, yeah.
I really really doubt they're doing that in a
Well,
carbon neutral way. But
no, yeah, yeah. There's no way this thing's going to happen ever. It's a
well,
lot
won't
of
they build the first part? Aren't they building it now? Aren't they building some part
Yeah,
of it now?
they've actually they built like a little airport and a
Uh,
couple, visitor center, and they've actually started grading the land for about 30 miles inland,
mm-hmm.
the very first foundation. So they are pouring lots of money, but right now apparently it's just a place where consultants get paid a lot of money to make nice drawings, you know.
Maybe these will become the bunkers for dealing with climate change when the shit's hitting the fan or something like that.
Well, I mean, they have some interesting technologies they're experimenting with that might have benefit elsewhere. The outside walls of this are actually like mirrors, so they reflect the sunlight away from the interior structure. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're trying to figure out how to capture a lot of that power without reflecting it. They can power, electrical activity within the city. So, it will be worthwhile, probably to gather some technologies and experiments from. I think
Mm-hmm.
Toyota is building another city in Japan, in kind of a similar vein, but with no cars. It's, all high tech, intelligent transport
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure and stuff. But
So those are some of the good things. Maybe by the way, maybe we should open it up to
yeah,
others. If you have a comment or a question for either Will or myself about AI, climate change, or you want to make a short comment, like 30 seconds kind of comment, then please do so. We're going to start off with our co-mods, Stacy and Eli. And Stacy, I don't know if you're ready, but Stacy, if you're ready, please come on camera there. And hi there. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming back, Will.
yeah,
Um, so I have too many comments about the manufactured societies, the new ones versus recycling what we already have and improving them. But I'm really curious about AI in terms of how can it, I mean, it can do all these things. Why aren't we using it to solve some of our climate issues? Why aren't we using it to model and project? And if we are, please tell me, because I only hear about how to make me look like a superhero, or some help my kids type papers and stuff. So
Mhm.
I'd love to know what we're doing for climate with AI.
Well, this is stuff that's, really starting to get traction right now. What you hear about are the kind of bright, shiny toys, large language models, where it can write things that you can read, you can kind of talk to it, conversational models. Those are very approachable and understandable. But the exact same dynamics can be used to take a large data set like climate or economics and look for non-obvious connections, correlations between these factors. They say that these large language models are actually correlating factors across about 1 trillion dimensions, which is almost impossible to even, well, it is impossible to
Yep.
conceive of.
Yep.
But there are a lot of people looking right now, and also a lot of the work right now in AI has been on what they call generative models. These are models that you can give it like something short and it'll expand, it'll make up a story or create an image. But most of it is not really truth. It's just taking what it saw, what it learned on the internet and saying, okay, how do I turn this into a 5-act play?
Clever.
Or yeah.
What was yours, Dan? A Shakespearean rap or something on climate?
A
Yeah,
Shakespearean sonnet on climate change. Yeah.
Sonnet.
yeah.
Okay.
And so it knew certain things about climate, a lot about Shakespeare, was able to combine those things into something else. But there are other ones that are called non-generative models, which are not actually creating, like new data. They're actually sticking with existing data. And that's what you need for, building a predictive climate model. And those you can actually go back and say, okay, why did you, make this decision or take that branch? And there are a lot of scientists right now feverishly working on these type of models to apply to things like science, like climate science. So I think this is happening. We haven't seen a lot of results yet, but I think within 5 years, it will be the norm, really, for building these elaborate environmental models.
Okay.
And I can mention one. There's a company called Phaidra, which is Phaidra, and they're based in Seattle, and they came out of Google DeepMind, and they're the folks who figured out how to lower Google data center energy usage using AI. It's a different kind of AI than the one that wrote the Shakespeare stuff, and it does a much better job than humans of monitoring all of the air conditioning, heating systems, and the weather and everything like that, and comes up and it saves really significant amount, 20, 30, 40% of the energy usage just to keep the data center or the industry, the pharmaceutical plant running efficiently. And so there's an example of AI. It's just starting, by the way. I mean, it's a new company and everything, but the technology has already been applied to Google and it's working well. And so that's an example of AI lowering energy usage, for example. So there will be many applications like that of making things more efficient, of eliminating waste and things like that. And so that's the good news. I mean, there certainly like many technologies can be used for good or for bad.
Yeah, I guess I look at that as this is brilliant. This is a tool. This is like our LED bulb, for
Yeah.
buildings and whatever, and why wouldn't you use it for that? I guess I'm, the one I'm an American. Don't I want the magic pill that's going to solve everything? And
Yeah.
can't AI do that? Can't they apply that to all the data that we have available and figure it all out and tell us what we need to do to, because the issue is no one wants to change. We can't even look past ourselves. We say we want to help our children. We say we want to make the world better. We say we don't want what is going to happen to them, but we are locked in place and keep doing the same things that we've always been doing. We can't break free and do things that are difficult. It is inconvenient. And so we are stuck in our ways. And until we do find some sort of magic thing, and I was kind of hoping you'd say, oh, there's these people that are applying AI and they're going to figure it all out. But I'll take one step at a time, I guess.
Well, I mean,
So,
also in architecture, this has been a movement for quite a while now of intelligent buildings that kind of, try to maximize their energy efficiency. And that is going to be a huge thing going forward.
although I will say, by the way, there's something called Jevons paradox, which says the more efficient we use a resource, the more that resource is used in total. And this is true of, well, certainly coal. The coal was very inefficient back in the day. And then someone invented the steam engine, which used coal far more efficiently. So it was much cheaper to use coal to run a factory, for example, than it was in the past. Therefore, you would think that coal would drop since, you only needed like a third as much coal to do the same thing. But of course, what happened was coal started spreading everywhere and it shot up. Same is true LED bulbs. You look around a house now, a lot more lights in the house now. There used to be.
It's so much brighter though, Dan.
So much brighter. It is more
Brighter.
brighter. And so you can argue. So you have to be a little careful, by the way, about all these. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're not good. It just means that you have to be a little careful with energy efficiency, because you get what's called the rebound effect. Hey, Stacy, I'm going to move to Eli, but if you could take a look at the YouTube comments, the Clubhouse comments, and the
Sure,
Zoom
I'll be
comments,
back.
and come up, see if there's any interesting questions to ask. We can come back to you in a little bit. And then Eli, welcome to the discussion.
Hi, thanks, Dan. Will, so if I remember correctly, when you joined us on Climate Chat earlier, there was a little bit of discussion of gaming scenarios related to climate and possibly developing games that focus on this topic. And I'd kind of like to tie together a few things that we've discussed and that you've discussed in this hour as a possible possibly highly impactful scenario to get people's attention. The first fact that I'll point out is that if you look at the particular configuration of drivers of climate change and possible amplifying feedbacks, they're not well represented in the geologic data. So if you wanted to be like really evidence-based, we could be totally blindsided. And you mentioned earlier how it's easier to think about 2050 than it is 2030. That's kind of a human cognitive bias. But the scenario would be amplifying feedbacks hitting us hard way sooner than we thought. And part of the game is figuring out what kind of interventions to try to pursue, and subsidiary to that, trying to model them, again, with something like AI or a simplified climate models. And also, this is an interesting rub that just occurred to me, combating AI disinfo campaigns that are trying to impede doing anything, because some people are doomers and some people really believe it will benefit them. And I think there's just like a lot of really interesting potential plot lines that could be developed in that framework. So I was wondering about your thoughts.
Well, you're talking about a number of different topics here. When I did SimCity, a lot of people immediately said, "Oh, let's use this to predict what our city is going to do or how we should develop it." But something like SimCity is not a predictive model at all. Again, cities are just almost maybe more complex than climate, because there's so many different factors: economic, sociological, etc. What simulations are really good at, though, is spotlighting our ignorance of a system. If we build a simulation of something and then we compare it to our actual empirical data and we see where it's off, it'll show us, oh, you were way off on this one factor. And we start realizing that, oh, that is a very high leverage point that our model did not capture. And that's why our data set, our empirical data is not matching our predictive simulation. And so that's one of, I think, the most useful things about simulations is that they basically spotlight our ignorance. I think that, not quite a game, but I think it's something I keep kind of arguing for in different venues, is the idea that we should have kind of a global climate modeling competition. And there are kind of informal versions of this, but something where groups of people are building climate models independently. They get together once a year, compare their predictions to reality, learn from each other, because I think the peer-to-peer learning is what's really lost right now. You have these different groups working for companies or universities or whatever, and they share through papers they publish and all that, but it's not really hands on the ground, let's learn as fast as we can from each other. There was this story, I don't know if I mentioned it the last time I was on, about, these hoverboards these little things you stand on, 2 feet, you balance, self-balancing, things we call hoverboards. They just popped onto the market one day, all over the place. And initially they were like $1,000, but within about a year or two, they were down to $200. The story behind that was in China, there was this informal group of Chinese engineers that had like a message board, and they all worked for different companies. And they would share just like cool little projects they were doing at home. And one guy came up with this idea of a self-balancing board, and he put a little circuit diagram up. And some of the other engineers said, "Oh, you should change this, or you should add that, or oh, we have just the right kind of motor over here." But it was people working for different companies, but they were just hardcore engineers having fun. And there was no concept of IP protection. Nobody was trying to patent this, or whatever. Within about 2 years, they had a beautifully running thing, and they all went back to their company saying, "Let's build this." And so almost instantaneously, like 5 different Chinese companies were selling these things, and the source parts, like the brushless motors, just plummeted in cost. So that's why, they were able to sell this thing that for $200, it would have initially cost 2,000. It was almost like they went from the iPhone 1 to the iPhone 12 in 1 year. It was that kind of advancement. It was kind of the peer-to-peer learning between these engineers, and I think we could set up something with climate modeling like that, to where the best and the brightest are encouraged to have peer-to-peer learning, but at the same time, be somewhat competitive and say, okay, we'll measure these models against a 1 year time frame, a 5 year, 10 year, continuously, and see which ones are kind of zeroing in on the truth. To me, that's something that I really believe we should be doing right now.
Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Oh, maybe Eli's gone. Okay. Let's I'm going to turn on allow people to unmute and everything. Let's see. I don't know, Colleen or Michael, if you have any questions. If you do, please raise your hand using the reactions at the bottom of the screen, just reactions, and then raise hand. And so Eli's having trouble with his signal. Okay. And Stacy, did you find any other questions on any of the other comment boards that we should bring up, or comments?
Yeah. So, well, just a little off topic, but certainly newsworthy. Bev was wondering about a ginormous Antarctic iceberg floating. I hadn't heard of that, and I've been looking around, but
that was
are
about
you
2
aware of
weeks
that?
ago, I think. It was about 2 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, but I saw that too listed there, but I don't know the specifics.
Okay. And then the one I liked was, could a virtual economy help us decouple from nature?
Say that again?
Could a virtual economy help us decouple from nature? I took it as, we're very, I was saying, we're so focused, we can't even think about our kids, let alone other species and the future and things like this. We take and do whatever we want to this physical world. And so if we were going more virtually, which is not my favorite thing, I want us to be present in the world, but be in harmony with it. Could we decouple ourselves and hopefully not be as horrible to it as we have been?
I think, well, maybe we could use AI for like virtual travel to go anywhere we want, have a personal movie made for us just to our own. And that kind of thing might, of course, you do have the AI energy used to create all that stuff, but probably less than flying somewhere, maybe, but still we have that kind of today, but I don't know. I think,
I think if our economy today is virtual, ever since we went to like fiat currencies and whatnot, as opposed to just a barter system, we do in some sense have a virtual economy right now, and we have for quite a while. I'm not quite sure I understand the gist of the question, though.
Yeah, I would agree with what Will said, that like our economy sort of is virtual in many ways today. Money is not really a real thing, right? But
it's a human construct, yes. But yet we chase it as if it were very, very real.
I was wondering though whether they meant if we lived in a virtual world like all the time, we wouldn't have to travel. All we'd have to do is eat, and then all our other needs are taken care of virtually.
And then, of course, I think of Soylent Green, but whatever. um,
Well, probably
uh,
like a lot of us, I mean, we have our meetings with our coworkers and whatnot, just like this, virtually online, you know.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, Dan's an AI construct right now.
Yep.
Certainly in 10 years, he will be, you know, able to make the AI construct conversing just as convincingly as he is right now. You know, so at that point, you know, we probably will have a virtual companies, you know, virtual employees.
all I can
Speaking
think
of,
of is Jane Jetson, or Judy, I guess it was, putting on her happy face, and now you won't even have to bother about that. You'll have a whole it's Stacy, here she is,
Oh yeah.
well, maybe we could veer off the subject for just a moment, since you kind of made me think about it, and maybe you could just tell us the short version about Proxy and what we can expect when your new quote game or toy or entertainment, and that which uses AI, and maybe you could just tell us just a little bit what it is and maybe when we can expect to see it.
Yeah, well, I'm always careful not to try to overhype.
Yeah, don't say too much, but there's a website they can go to and see
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah. But you know, the basic idea is we want to build a game where your mind is the landscape of that game. And you know, first of all, we want to have a really fun way to build maps of your mind, how you think. You know, each individual is different. And in my gaming career, I've gotten more and more fascinated with the individual users and how they think and how they believe different things. You know, when I watch people build cities, I could tell by the city they built, oh, that person really is concerned about crime, or this person traffic, or that one pollution. Uh, just by what they built. You know, each one, you know, SimCity doesn't tell you what type of city to build. It just says build your, you know, the best city you can. And the user, in some sense, comes up with a goal state. I want a city with low crime or low traffic. And so that kind of got me more and more into the user psychology. And so in Proxy, basically put in a very simple way, I can tell it a story about my life, or, you know, a memory from when I was a kid or when I was in college, or a family memory. And it will save that memory, build kind of a visual representation of it. It can even enhance that memory and, you know, tell the funny version of that memory, the tragic version. I can keep that very private in my memory world, my kind of memory palace, which is like a little world of memories, or I can choose to share it socially with shared worlds that I have with my college roommates or my family. From that, and there's a resource allocation game happening there, kind of like SimCity. As you move memories around, it makes connections. But we're actually building a conceptual web of how you think. And that's where we can start building all these maps of your mind. You know, how do you associate certain emotions with places or people with activities, all this stuff. And eventually we actually create an avatar of you with your memories and knowing, you know, what your life was like, that we call a proxy. That can now go out and do lots of other different activities. But that's kind of the gist of it. You know, I wanted to make a game that was very much based on the individual player psychology.
Well, when can the folks listening to this expect to see this and get their hands on at least the first parts of it?
Probably near the end of this year will be the first parts of it. Early part of next year will be most of the rest of it. We're going to be deploying it like 3 stages.
Okay, good.
I want to sign up. And
okay.
And I do have a question about it. You said you could share memories with people. Are they compared or contrasted so that you can see how you saw it or recall it, and they can see how?
Exactly. Yeah, we're building some mini games around that. So maybe you and I went to a concert back in college and you had a great time, but I got sick, you know, and it'll actually look at, you know, why we had different perceptions of the same memory. And so.
And are you working with Neuralink at all, or?
No, we're actually working with Numenta, which is a company started by Jeff Hawking. And they have a kind of a different approach to AI models that are more factual, less hallucination. They also run much more efficiently. So we're also using the OpenAI, you know, ChatGPT models as well. But it's very uncertain kind of what the economics that are going to be going forward. So
he wants $7 trillion.
Yeah.
Sam wants $7 trillion or something. I don't even know what's that about.
Well, but it's also like, you know, they're basically kind of giving out this drug for free now. And at some point, they can start jacking up the price, you know.
Then they'll reel you in.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's okay if we have, a few hundred people using it, but if we have a few million, or tens of millions using it, that's when the economics really matters,
Yep. Okay,
So,
thank you. I look forward to it.
okay. So, just want to get back to kind of bring it all back full circle back to climate change and AI. We had an interesting discussion. I think we both made the case that I think you made the case that AI is potentially very dangerous and dangerous in a quite short term because of Moore's law. It can grow very rapidly. I think I was making the case that climate change is dangerous and is going to get more dangerous on a fairly steady time frame.
Right.
And while I wouldn't use Moore's law, I would say that as the temperature goes up, the impacts could grow exponentially. So the average temperature is going to grow fairly linearly, well, at a fairly rapid pace. But the damage we've seen the damage from 0 to 1 degree, and it was fairly disruptive. We saw quite a bit. We're just now seeing what 1.5 degrees is, and that's kind of getting on the news every day. It hasn't broken down society in most places, maybe in a few places. 2 degrees, it's not just a linear thing to map a temperature into damage. So I would kind of argue that the impact of climate change could actually grow exponentially over the next 20, 30 years, as opposed to the actual measuring stick we use, which is temperature.
I would agree with that. I mean, but I think let's say we're talking a 20-year time span, we still kind of understand the elements of climate change: temperature, pressure, precipitation,
food supply,
farming, displacement, refugees. We kind of understand the major parameters that might happen over, either very fast or longer timescales. We look 20 years at AI, we have no concept of what it'll be able to do or what it will become over 20 years, even 10 years, it's going to be a huge difference. 20 years, no telling. So we have no visibility, no map at all into what the possibility space is concerning the risks of AI. We're developing a fairly decent map in terms of the risk profile for potential climate change.
Yeah, but that also I would say we underestimate. By the way, for some of the same reasons you're bringing up. I mean, people just say, well, the temperature when you can't stand outside anymore is going to happen this time with this probability, but that's not probably what's going to get you first. I mean, what's going to get you first are the kind of things you're talking about, where something that we didn't even think about necessarily is going to cause it much more difficult to have a functioning society, right?
Yeah.
The food stress, the beginning of it, it doesn't have to be when it's so bad that no one has any food. It just has to be when 10% of the people don't have food, and when 10% of the people don't have food, those people are not very happy.
Right.
And they're going to do something, or they're going to either move to where you are, or they're going to fight. I mean, this is what happened in Syria with a 5-year drought, which already occurred, a decade ago or something. So I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm saying when you think about the impact, when you say we've mapped out the impacts of climate change, that's sort of the physical kind of climate impacts. That's not the societal impacts that those physical impacts have. Right. And those will be just as disruptive, if not more disruptive.
You're right. Those are
AI.
not things that we're going to see coming necessarily, like Katrina hitting New Orleans.
Right.
We're going to have more events like that where it's just
we will.
Out the blue, giant hurricane hit some very sensitive area, causes displacement, disruptions, and food supply, whatever. So we're going to continually have these things that are not long-term predictable, but statistically, we will say those things will happen more often, though.
Absolutely. And other things are going to happen, but again, hitting society is, and in some sense, this has already happened. It's like, the roadrunner or the coyote running off the cliff and he doesn't look down so he doesn't fall yet. It's like the insurance in Miami, home insurance in Miami. knowing what we know about the future, I mean, they're pretty much screwed. Insurance is going up a lot now, and some insurance companies are pulling out. But let's take 10 years from now when the reality truly settles in. I mean, that makes living there, even though it's not flooded yet or anything, maybe it's flooded once in a while, it just makes it economically not viable. And then that makes people very upset. And then it's putting stresses and stresses and stresses until something breaks. And so again, not just that Katrina, which certainly, there are going to be more of those, already are, by the way, but that flood, and it's not any one thing, right? It's stronger hurricanes, it's more droughts and more floods, it's more wildfire. These are all happening already, but now just scale them up. And with the exponential impact, the steady increase, but with exponential impacts of tipping over some stable living situation. And so I see that happening. And again, not 2050, not 2100, 2030, 2040. The lifetimes of us, but we'll be maybe a little older looking back. Hey, we were right. But our kids, being in their 30s and having to deal with this stuff. And again, you can imagine with AI, I'm plugging it, although you and I had some pretty good discussions about that, about how do you try to do that if you wanted to, but you can't unplug climate change. So any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I
response?
don't disagree. I'm sure climate, again, it is happening. It's going to happen. We're kind of past the point of easy solutions, and I think you and I both agree that, at some point we're going to have to, bite off the idea of, geoengineering, SRM, all these different things where we need to start actively adjusting the climate through technological means, which is a huge risk in itself. But again, this is one of those things where AI might be on our side, that if we build AI systems that understand the complexity of this, we might have a much better chance of not screwing it up worse, as we start doing geoengineering. But but even that, getting people, there's so many issues there. If, one country unilaterally decides to put aerosols in the atmosphere and it, causes a huge famine in some other country, are they liable for it? It's just a huge, kind of tangled web of, connections here.
Well, I think I don't know. I'll leave it to others to judge who won the debate, whether it's AI or climate change. Obviously, both are very concerning. I would argue that we really got to get on the ball now. Well, actually, probably for both of them, but for certainly climate, narrow window where we can actually do something about it. And the amazing thing about climate change and probably about AI is so far we've chosen to fail. Like we know what the problem is, we know what the solutions are, and we just kind of choose to fail. To me, that's the strangest thing about all of this is that we've done that. I do think that as things get worse, we might choose to succeed, and then we have tools that we're going to use to fight the battle. Hopefully, we don't wait too long on that. But I want to thank you so much for participating in this discussion and bringing your knowledge of AI and opening our eyes to that. I do also want to suggest to anyone who's watching this to please subscribe to Climate Chat and to like the video so that more people will see it. Will, do you have any final thoughts or comments on any of this before we close it out?
No, I enjoy these discussions. Thanks again for inviting me. I'm still in my mind kind of trying to catalog and understand the risks of AI. So I'm not sure I'm the best proponent for AI being riskier than climate change, because I do see how amazingly dire we are kind of in the climate problem. AI, it's just surprised me over the last 5 years because I've been following it. And for the very first time, it's kind of exceeding by leaps and bounds what we thought it could do over this time frame. I don't think 10 years ago, anybody would have predicted where we are right now with AI. It's kind of like cold fusion, or actually just fusion power in general, was always 10 years on the horizon, 10 years on the horizon. AI
That's
was
right.
always like that, and now it's like, holy crap, look what this stuff can do. And so it's both surprising and delighting to me, but it is, it is scaring me to the degree that we just do not understand the landscape ahead of us.
And there was some, I can't remember exactly when I heard it, but it seems like 20 years ago that in like 17 years, a computer, $2,000 computer is going to have the power of a human brain. And another 17 years, it's going to have the power of all human brains. And that's like this exponential rise that you were kind of talking. I don't know the exact numbers on that, but
Right, but this is all the idea of the singularity, that we're hitting
right.
all these transformational technologies that are, they're going to transform our society in some way. We don't know how, though.
Yes. Well, as they say, may you live in interesting times, and so I
Yeah,
guess
that's for sure.
that's sort of guaranteed at this point. So thank you, Will. Thank you, Will Wright, for joining us. And remember that we have a climate chat on YouTube every Sunday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we'll see what next week holds. We'll have a number of guests lined up. Without particular dates, including David Fenton, who's been with us before, who's an expert on communicating about climate change. Doug McMartin, who's an expert on solar radiation management or sunlight reflection methods, a researcher out of Cornell. And we have some other things lined up as well. Don't have particular schedule for that yet, but we'll let you know, and we'll post it on Twitter and on LinkedIn. So with that, Will, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.